I invite you to imagine with me that it's a cold night. Easier to do after a morning like today's. You may be wearing many layers of jackets and sweaters, maybe even snow pants and gloves and boots and hats. You're trying to keep out the chill, but nothing is doing the trick. In the distance, you see a faint glow, and as you walk closer, the snow's crunching under your feet, reminding you of how cold you are. A cold wind rises even stronger, but drawing close, you see others huddled tightly around a campfire. The fire rises against the night, even beginning to melt some of the snow around it. You draw right up alongside the fire, and the skin on your face, all that's exposed to the air, begins to feel the warmth. So you quickly begin to take off your gloves and extend your hands toward the warmth. Those around the fire slide out of the way a little to let you draw nearer. So then you open your coat and begin to feel the warmth against your body, and the chill that has gripped you is now broken. You have a moment there where you bask in almost reverent submission before the warmth of the fire, heart and layers open to its life-giving power. Maybe you look up and smile around at those standing around the fire with you. A community now, sustained against the heart of bitter night by the life of this defiant fire. Even as the night and cold desolation presses in around you, nothing separates you now from this community of fire. Community drawn together by warmth that defies the bitter cold of isolation. Love that. But let's continue to imagine. What would it have been like if you stayed at a distance? Would you have received the warmth from the fire that far away? Would you have gotten to know the community that's gathered there? What about if you had left all the layers on when you got to the fireside? Those layers had done their best to block out the worst of the cold, and they would in turn do their part to block out the warmth as well. You'd have felt some warmth, but not all of it. And what would have happened if someone else had come forward and stood between you and this life-giving flame, blocking you from the heat? Would you stay obstructed, or would you move over to a new place of warmth? These questions, this imagination, reveals the things that separate us from the flame and its life-giving light and warmth, whether it's distance or layers or others. Somehow things get in the way. Some days I think that faith can feel like this fire. We need the gift of the fire's warmth with nothing in the way. And yet it feels like everything is standing between us. Nothing is an important word to keep in mind as we hear this story today from Exodus of God giving the 10 Commandments and the covenant to the people of Israel in the wilderness. As I shared with our kids this morning, as I'm really excited to share in a couple weeks on Wednesday evenings as we continue our Faith on the Road series, I had this opportunity to venture into this very land of wilderness where our story takes place. The desert was something surreal. I described it often as beautiful desolation. Looking out across nothing and knowing that it was nothing, different from looking out across an ocean where you know that beneath the surface there's life. There's some comfort in that, as well as fear. But looking over the desert, there is a breathtaking amount of nothing. And I was struck as we traveled through the Sinai wilderness by how terribly dependent the people of Israel would have been on God. In this place and time where they had nothing, God gives them a covenant that they will become a priestly people and a holy nation. God gives them the commandments needed to live into that covenant. It turns out that an understanding of nothing was all the people needed to receive and live into these commandments. Because, dear church, this might be a surprise to you, but the 10 Commandments, I believe, are all about nothing. Specifically, they remind us that nothing comes between us and God. Nothing comes between us. Nothing can change our belovedness. So let's look closer at these commandments, because I say the commandments are about nothing, but what are the point of the Ten Commandments in Luther's words? In his explanation of each commandment that's found in the Small Catechism, he begins each point by saying, we are to fear and love God. In Luther's eyes, the commandments draw us back to a reverent awe of the people of God and a realization of how terribly much we depend on God to provide. In a way, these commandments also draw us back to the Sinai wilderness, to rely fully on God's goodness. These commandments are as well a covenant between the people and their God, and between the people and one another, of what it means to live as a new nation. The person who lives by these commandments is living within the covenant of community. They are living as God's people, and they are living as people of God. We see this in what can be called a cruciform setting of the commandments. The first three commandments, no other gods, do not take the name of the Lord in vain, and remember the Sabbath, are all means of being in relationship with God. In last week's story of the Exodus, if that was a story of getting the people out of Egypt, then the commandments are a means of getting Egypt out of the people. Unlike the culture that they just came from, they are not meant to call upon different gods to meet different needs in different times. They are to call upon the God of Israel in all times and all places. And to call upon the name of God is not to be taken lightly. Taking this commandment about taking God's name in vain is not really about swearing when we stub our toe, but rather about using God's name as a basis for perpetuating injustice and harm. God's name can be called upon in judgment. But remember, in these very verses, God says that punishment can be carried through for 4 generations, which seems harsh until we read the next verse, where it says that God's mercy and faithfulness abides through the 1,000th generation. Call upon the name of the Lord, yes, but do not do so lightly. And remember always that mercy outweighs vengeance at a rate of 1,000 to 4. And likewise, mercy extends to the ways that we work and live as a community of God. As the call to Sabbath reminds us that it is against God's will for us to work ourselves or our neighbors or our creatures to death. God rested, and God calls us to rest in God's promises. These 3 commandments make this vertical dimension of our lives as people in relationship with God, and nothing comes between us and God. Commandments 4 through 8. Honor father and mother, no murder, no adultery, no stealing, no false witness. These things are all about the horizontal dimension of our relationship with one another. We live within reciprocal relationships where we uplift one another. We value our families, parents honoring children, children honoring their parents. We value life, not merely just not killing one another, but looking to build up life where we can. We value faithfulness and fidelity, honoring the covenants we make before God. We value our belongings, not to the point of idolatry, but to respecting one another. We value truth, not just for preventing ourselves from telling lies about others, but seeking the best in what others have to say. Integrity and dignity are meant to mark our relationship with one another in an ordered society of covenant people. Together, these commandments of relationship with God and with one another create this cross, this cruciform life, the juxtaposition of our lives as people in relationship with God and neighbor. The point in all of this is that nothing comes between us and God, and nothing is to come between us as a community. But then there's commandments 9 through 10. No coveting house, no coveting spouse and stuff, to paraphrase. These are commandments all about the heart of who we are as individual people. Coveting is an act of the heart and mind, a sense that we are lacking and insufficient. These commandments remind us to not let our emotions come between us and our own sense of sufficiency and belovedness, Do not worry about whether you are enough. You are enough to God. Nothing can ever change that. You don't need to compare yourself to others. You need only to appreciate who you are and what you have been given to live into who you are. You are enough. You are God's chosen people. You have received the gift of grace, and you are beloved. Nothing can change our belovedness in God's eyes. And so this is what brings the cruciform life back to our hearts, to be lived and shared. It's in that spirit today that we share the Word of God with our young people in this congregation. As we give out Bibles today, we give out the profound gift of nothing. The gift of the Word is a reminder again and again that nothing comes between us and God. Nothing comes between us, and nothing can change our belovedness. The stories in these pages are a light, a fire in the cold night to warm us and draw us together when we feel we are lost. These words and stories, received when we have nothing, draw us into the promise of the one who is abundance, new life, and hope. But it is truly rare that we come to the Word with nothing. Sin, fear, shame, and bias certainly exists as a heavy coat in our lives. It wraps us and surrounds us. It is with us as we wander in the cold and barren wilderness, and it feels like foolishness to put that aside. But through grace, our sin has been reconciled, and we are called to lay it down and step boldly into the ever-burning firelight of God's love. Put it aside. Feel this foolish fire. It is freedom, and it is life. And so we take off our layers of piety and our gloves of righteous works, that we might feel the warmth of grace upon our hearts. Those things may have made us feel good while we were still wandering cold, but we cannot manufacture our own fire. We cannot manufacture our own grace, but we can live in God's promises and share the warmth of the covenant with all people. This commandment fire is about nothing, and nothing comes between us and God. Nothing comes between us, and nothing can change our belovedness. God has done this work of freeing us from our own needs to manufacture salvation or form an artificial community. Through the warmth of God's fire, we are set free by grace and gathered together as one community, rooted in covenant and promise. Through whatever barren desert and isolating trials life has to offer, as we wander through this frightful wilderness, it is important to hear this lesson alongside the people of Israel. These 10 commandments have a way of drawing each of us back to that desert, equipped with nothing but finding that we have everything we need. So many of us feel like we're wandering, cold and alone, piling on distractions and worries and fears and egos and pride to weather our own deserts alone, trying to save ourselves through more stuff. But friends, the fire is already lit. The invitation is already open, and we are not alone in the wilderness. And we hear it once again, something that may sound like a challenge to us, but is truly a promise for us. Nothing will ever come between us and God. Nothing should ever come between us. Nothing can change our belovedness. Amen.